Thank you all for joining. Good morning. Welcome. I'm Meredith Henry. I'm the Marketing and Communications Director for Second Story, and we're grateful that you've taken time to join us for today's Learning Series event on online gambling and its impact on young people. So before we begin, I just wanted to note that, as you heard, today's session is being recorded just so we can share it with the broader community. To respect everyone's time, we'll stick to a 45-minute session, so we won't have a live Q&A, but we'll send a follow-up email with contact information. You can submit questions, and we can continue the conversation that way. So to just start things off, I'd like to share just a little bit about Second Story in case any of you are new here. For 54 years, we've been serving local youth and families through both residential and community-based programs. Our residential services include safe housing, rental assistance, counseling, life skills lessons, and other services for young people experiencing homelessness or other challenges. We operate the region's only emergency home for teens, and we run a 24-hour crisis hotline for teens as well. On our community-based programs, we work in neighborhoods where many face economic hardship. We provide after-school programs, a teen center, family resource centers, and we serve as the lead agency for the county's Opportunity Neighborhoods program in Bailey's Crossroads. So our staff works with young people every day. We see concerning trends often long before they become widely recognized. So when we identify something that could impact youth safety or well-being, we believe it's critical to inform the community, to start some honest conversations, and to equip the adults in young people's lives with knowledge and resources to help protect them. So online youth gambling has been a concern for us, but new research proves that it's becoming more widespread. Just this year, a Common Sense media study came out that said 1 in 3 11-year-old boys have engaged in some form of gambling. And then by the age of 17, that number rises to half. Many don't even recognize that their games qualify as gambling because the lines can be blurry. So we're fortunate to have two highly knowledgeable speakers joining us today. First, we'll hear from Kim Freudenberg, co-founder of Parents Standing Together. Kim brings both professional expertise and personal experience to this issue, and we're deeply appreciative of her willingness to share her story and her insights. We'll also hear from Genevieve Dunn, Second Story's compliance and training manager, who will discuss why adolescents are especially vulnerable to gambling-related harm, how betting culture reaches youth, warning signs, and practical ways we can start conversations and set healthy boundaries. So Kim, thank you again for being here. I'm going to turn it over to you so you can share a little bit about your journey and your organization.
Awesome. Thank you, Meredith, so much. And thank you, everyone, for having me. I appreciate getting the chance to share my story with you. So let me see. I'll just watch the timer, 9:06. Okay. So I'm Kim Freudenberg. I'm a high school teacher by trade currently. I teach physics in a high school here in San Francisco. And I'm now also an IGRS, which is a certified gambling peer specialist, which is sort of going to be my new career at 54 after being sort of thrust into this world of having a child with a gambling addiction. Didn't really think this is what I'd be doing. I thought I'd be kind of like skating to retirement with my kids all set, but didn't work out that way, did it? And of course, as Meredith said, I now run a nonprofit called Parents Standing Together. There's our website there. There's a lot of information. So I'm going to start and just tell you a little bit about how I got into it. So this is my son Kurt. When he was a sweet tiny baby there on the left, I didn't think like, gosh, I can't wait to grow up and raise a gambling addict. That wasn't really in the cards. It wasn't in the books. The picture on the right is him at 11 on his 11th birthday, 11th or 12th, somewhere around there. And this is actually the age when he started gambling. We didn't find out until he was 19. So one of our missions is to try to help other parents see some signs that we missed, because we could have maybe, hopefully, in theory, saved ourselves a whole lot of suffering and heartache, which I'll talk about in a minute. Then now the bottom picture, we just last weekend, Kurt and I went to speak at a problem gambling conference in Delaware and then spent the weekend in New York City together. So that was us at the top of the rock. So I thought I'd throw that in for the hope after recovery. Now he's doing really well. He's 23. He has about 2 almost and a half years away from a bet. So it was a little bit of a long road. So let's see. So he started gambling at 11 on skins betting. So he was playing video games, and I knew he was playing video games, and I kind of knew what he was playing, not totally. My husband knew a little more than I did. And he would buy these skins, which are cosmetic items like for a gun or a outfit or something, which I didn't really understand. And he would always buy these every time he would get money, which wasn't that often because he didn't really have money at 11 or 12. As he says, like, well, I didn't really have a source of income when I was 11 or 12. But, grandma would send $20 for Easter, or, he'd get Christmas money or birthday money. And all of that money seemed to go into buying these skins. So at the time, I thought, well, that's stupid because what is this even? This is not even a real thing. But he didn't really have other hobbies. He wasn't into like shoes or clothes or anything. So I sort of brushed it off as like, well, this is just what he likes to do with his free time. I don't understand it because I'm old and it's a new generation and, whatever. So that continued through middle and high school that he would, every time he would get money, he would do these skins and other things. And then he would buy them and take them to an offshore illegal casino site. He saw a YouTuber, somebody in the chat put some website one time that he was watching a stream of something, and he went to this website, which turned out to be an offshore casino with, of course, no age checks, illegal, just, lets everybody on. And you could actually take these skins and trade them in for currency and play like roulette and blackjack and all of this stuff. And he was doing that like all through middle and high school, right? Also CS:GO he played with the crates and the, loot boxes and opening crates, all these mystery things was also kind of part of his early gambling days. Of course, he had a, big win. He tells it now when he was about 12, he hit like $2,000 on some, I don't know, stupid thing. And after that, he said he was hooked. So that's, I think Genevieve's going to talk about or early risk factors, and an early win is definitely one of those. And that's kind of what got him. And in retrospect, he said at age 12, I knew I was a gambling addict. He already knew that. He'd kind of identified in himself that at age 12, he said it was already over for him. Would have been nice if he clued us into that. We didn't find out till he was 19, but that's what it was. So when he went away to college, it sort of escalated, right? Because he was out of state. We're in California. He was somewhere else. And I could tell his first semester he was okay. And then his second semester really started to go downhill. He had moved into a single because he was having roommate issues. And then, as he tells it now, he was just gambling probably 15 hours a day. Constantly. He was getting money any way he could. He was selling things that we would send him. He was, borrowing money from people, probably stealing money from people. They would do these little like surveys or trivias on these sites where you could sit around, and he said he would work 10 hours to get like $3 so that he could bet it away in 30 seconds, right? So it's all part of the cycle. After his first semester in college, he had pretty much failed out. He had a 1.7 after prior being, a great, he went to a Catholic high school where I teach here in the city. Great kid, AP classes, ran track, played soccer, just regular kid. But then became super, super isolated once he got to college. And he, as he tells it now, was just living in filth that second semester in college. Didn't wash his clothes, shower, brush his teeth for probably an entire semester for months. And I saw the evidence of those clothes when we went back to move him in the next year, and it was not it was not pleasant. And he was so addicted by this point that he was staying up all night, sleeping a little bit during the day, hardly eating. He said that he had to turn on like an autoplay on the slots on some of these offshore sites where they'll just continuously hit it. He had to have it continuously hitting so that he could leave the computer to go down and get food from the cafeteria, right? Because he was so addicted that he had to have that action at all moments, he said, or he felt like he couldn't breathe. He also was so isolated that he found like a big plastic tub, you put sweaters in or Christmas decorations, and thought it was a great idea to bring that into his dorm room so that he could pee in it, so that he didn't have to walk down the hall and go to the bathroom and leave the gambling and have eye contact with other people. right? So this was already probably 8 years into his gambling. Of course, we didn't know, but the escalation was pretty severe and pretty quick, right? Luckily, he didn't. I guess he didn't maybe know he could open credit cards. I don't know. He luckily didn't open any credit cards at this point. He was just doing random things to get a few dollars here and there and just bet constantly. Um, so when he came home from college after that first semester, and we're kind of like parent, like, okay, what's going on? Like, you're getting a 1.7, like this is not acceptable. I'm not paying for this. What's happening? Figured he was going to say he was doing drugs, which he had started smoking weed in this point also. And then, we waited him out, and then he just says, like, I'm gambling. We're like, what? Like, what is that? Like, no clue to what that even meant, right? Now, hopefully, parents are becoming more aware that they would know that, but at that point, we didn't. This was in 2022. And then what followed was us on a couple year journey to try to find the right help for him because we didn't really know what to do. Nobody we knew had friends that gambled, or at least that talked about it. And there was not, we couldn't find a lot of resources that were readily available for him. Wrapping up the story because I'm running out of time, but so he ended up getting a therapist, went back to school, came back home, flunked out again. We had him living with us for probably 6, 7 months until it just got unbearable and he was stealing from us and stealing our credit cards. My husband still sleeps with his wallet. His little PTSD, I think, still sleep. He doesn't even live here. He lives 8 hours away, but my husband still sleeps with his wallet. And he went to a rehab center for a month in the summer of 2023. The drop off for that was pretty brutal because we were basically at the point where like you have to go to rehab or you can't live in this house. You're going to have to be homeless. And it was a whole big ordeal. But it's a place a lot of parents get to, which I can talk more about when I talk about our group in the next section. And then he came out of that, thought he was okay. We sent him back to a different school in another state and thought he was doing well. Became pretty clear in the first couple of months that he was not. He had relapsed. We didn't have the right system set up for him. We know that now. And then by this point, we were a little smarter to the disease and we stopped enabling it. And we let him kind of have his consequences, which was an incredibly difficult time for us. But those consequences included eventually being arrested because he was stealing from the gym. And so he started stealing. He was arrested. And then at that point, he said, okay, actually, I think I do need help. Like, I'm ready to get better. And at that point, he was desperate to get well. Checked himself into another rehab center in Los Angeles, which was like a miracle from the angels. He was able to stay there for 10 months, which is kind of unheard of. And, really got it straightened out. Now he's back in school, living independently. He's going to graduate next year. And he wants to go into working somewhat in the problem gambling space. So, just as we start talking about it, just think like this is not something that happens to other people's kids. Like this is happening. It happened to my kid. It could happen to your kid. And in my groups, I'll talk about in the next section, all of the parents that we have in there are all really great, nice, wonderful parents, great families. Kids are in college thinking they're doing great or they've graduated college and then the collapse hits. So it's definitely something that should be on everyone's radar. It doesn't discriminate based on, race, religion, socioeconomic status. Gambling addiction really can hit everybody. And it's incredibly, incredibly dangerous and on the horizon. So, and Genevieve will probably talk to that. So, okay, I think I made it. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Kim. Wow. Thank you, especially
No, that
for
was
your
a lot. Sorry.
no, for your candidness and your openness. You've given us a lot to think of, a lot to think about, and I think we're now ready to learn. So, Genevieve, if you can take it away and help us better understand what we're looking out for and why this happens. Thank you.
Absolutely. I do want to start to understand today in the past. Specifically, there was a date in 1913, August 18th, where allegedly at the Monte Carlo casino, there was a single flawed thought process which led to millions of dollars in losses in one night. Interestingly, the roulette ball kept falling on black, not just a few times, but over and over. People began to bet and then started to increase their bets. And after all, surely it was more likely to eventually land on red, right? But it didn't. Only on the 27th spin did the roulette ball finally land on red. And even after that, a large portion of people who won money went on to immediately lose it because they assumed they would do a long streak of red after such a long streak of black. Now, you may already know this thought process as the gambler's fallacy, also known as the Monte Carlo fallacy, due to this specific incident. And in this cognitive distortion, a person believes that if an independent event happens less frequently than expected, it's more likely to happen again in the future. You can think of it in this way. If you were to bet in advance, the likelihood of the roulette ball landing on black 25 times in a row is 1 in over 33 million. The likelihood of it landing on black 26 times in a row is 1 in over 67 million. But once it's landed on black that 26th time, the chances of it landing on red next is still 50-50. And if you're confused, that's okay. It's a lot of numbers for the middle of the day. But if you, as a learned adult, are confused, do we really think the kids and teens who start gambling as young as elementary school these days are capable of understanding this sort of thing? Probably not, which is why we're all here. To begin, I want to establish what gambling is. In modern research, gambling can be defined as any risky behavior based on skill and/or chance in which something of value can be lost or won. Also, generally, the number of winners is lower than the number of participants, usually significantly. Historically, we think of gambling as associated with those classic in-person casino games like poker and roulette, traditional games like this PowerPoint theme references, but it's not 1913 anymore. And in 2026, gambling does consist of so much more than what you may know it as, which again, what we're going to discuss in detail today, so you know what to look out for. When does gambling cross the line from a casual, potentially fun activity and become problematic? Problematic gambling occurs when we see a persistent pattern of gambling despite distress, harms, and/or impairment in functioning that it causes. This severity does exist across a spectrum from low to high, and certain forms of gambling, such as online gambling, are typically associated with a higher level of risk and severity. But regardless of the format, problematic gambling is far more dangerous than you might think. In fact, people with gambling disorders have the highest suicide risk of any substance abuse or addictive disorder. 1 in 2 problematic gamblers will seriously consider suicide, with 1 in 5 going on to actually attempt it. Of course, there are many more gambling-related risks, which we'll discuss later on, but something else that's important to know. One 2025 study found youth who gamble even casually are 2 to 4 times more likely to become problematic gamblers compared to adults who gamble. Why is this true? Well, first we need to understand the motivation behind youth who gamble. By far, the main motivation was simply to have fun. In another 2025 study, 78% of youth who had gambled in the past 12 months cited fun as their primary motivation. Beyond fun, there are 3 main categories of motivational factors: practical, psychological, and social. Practically, they want to win money, right? Especially when it's promoted so widely as quote unquote easy money. Who's going to say no to easy money? Psychologically, we see a triad of factors, including an inclination towards risk, a desire to escape stress, in other words, using gambling as a coping method, and an inability to resist temptation. Socially, we know that youth, whether they're kids, teens, or young adults, want to fit in with their peers who maybe gamble themselves these days, or at least perceive gambling as quote unquote cool, partially thanks to the media's recently increasing promotion of online gambling as cool. Celebrities, athletes, and models advertise online betting companies during the Super Bowl now, almost every year. On a more quotidian basis, advertisements litter the online landscape. One study found that 49% of youth reported being exposed to gambling ads via social media platforms like Instagram, with 47% reporting exposure via phone apps, even when those apps were not related to gambling. Additionally, 31% saw gambling-related content like videos on social media, such as YouTube, with 16% of youth seeing influencers actively advertise it directly to them. Now, youth are especially vulnerable to escalating into problematic gambling for a few reasons. First, it is developmentally appropriate for youth to engage in risky, impulsive behavior from a neuroscientific standpoint. The anatomy of their brain is literally still developing, and most importantly, something called the prefrontal cortex hasn't matured yet. Most of that maturity occurs well into one's 20s. This area controls executive decisions like considering long-term consequences and controlling impulses. So it's therefore unsurprising when youth have difficulty with things like decision-making, goal setting, and self-control. Second, a lot of youth haven't finished their education yet, meaning many of them are unlikely to grasp some of the mathematical complexities of things like probabilities and odds. But even if your child is a math whiz, they are still inevitably learning about media literacy, including how to acknowledge and understand deceptive marketing. On top of that, as Kim mentioned, there are additional risk factors which can make youth even more susceptible to problematic gambling. First, having friends and family, especially parents who gamble, even casually. Second, being male, as males are, based on the research, more likely to engage in gambling behavior, especially as youth. Third, coming from a lower socioeconomic status can increase the risks slightly, even if there is that stereotype that gambling is for, quote unquote, high rollers or high income individuals. Fourth, being an ethnic minority can increase the risk. Fifth, as Kim mentioned about her son, winning a large amount of money early on in one's quote unquote career. Sixth, having co-occurring mental health issues, often depression and anxiety. Research actually shows the likelihood of having at least one other disorder in addition to gambling disorder can be over 90%. Seven, using or abusing substances. And eight, finally, being exposed to what we call in this field ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences. These are stressful events that occur in the first 17 years of life, and they can include anything from homelessness, domestic violence, to simply a parental separation or divorce. Now, how does the gambling landscape take advantage of all of this? One way these days is definitely through gaming. The convergence of gaming and gambling has resulted in the rise of digital platforms simulating gaming experiences without technically, formally, or legally being considered as gambling, which provides a loophole for youth to be exposed. Additionally, many video games themselves have gambling-like features such as what I mentioned earlier, loot boxes. Loot boxes are kind of like presents. They can be given as a reward within a game, or they can be purchased from the game's store, often with actual real-life money. They typically contain virtual goods. Usually they are cosmetic items such as skins, which change the appearance of your character and their accessories. But what kind of items are you going to get? Well, it is randomized, so you never know until you open it. You could get something cheap and common and boring, or something super rare and exciting. I mean, look how exciting this loot box here on the left looks. But the variable reward scheme and the uncertain outcomes are what make loot boxes so controversially similar to gambling in terms of their psychology. So it's unsurprising then that research has shown that participation in gaming with gambling-like features, such as loot boxes, has a positive correlation to problematic gambling behavior in youth. There's also an increase in novel digital forms of gambling outside of gaming, especially when it comes to online sports betting. For example, futures betting, which traditionally is part of sports betting where you're gambling on an event, a series, an award that will happen in the future instead of the day you're placing your bet. But nowadays, futures betting extends far beyond the realm of sports, covering everything from the weather, will it rain on April 25th, 2027, to celebrity relationships, will Katy Perry and former Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau become engaged by a certain date? Another example is fantasy sports, where you are picking your dream team of athletes who go on to compete against other fantasy teams in virtual leagues where you can gamble on the outcome, meaning their performance might win or more likely lose you money. Except fantasy sports are not legally defined as gambling at the federal level, meaning youth have greater access to it depending on the state. Another example is esports, aka electronic sports. This is when virtual athletes compete as individuals or teams in competitive video games. And in 2025, the global esports audience was estimated to consist of over 640 million people, many of them youth. Now, some of these games reflect actual sports like basketball, while others involve more traditional video games like you may have heard of League of Legends. Esports betting can be more conventional in its nature, such as betting on what team will win a certain game, or it may be unconventional, such as something Kim mentioned, which is called skins betting. Again, these are the type of character cosmetic that mimic gambling via loot boxes, But they can also be used to gamble as a form of currency. So the skins will be traded for tokens, which are then used to gamble in online casino games like poker, or they can also be used to bet on match outcomes. The skins you might win can be sold for real-world money, and some of them are legitimately worth over tens of thousands of American dollars. How often do you win, though? Well, according to one study, only 14% of bettors win anything, with 13% breaking even and 72% losing money, with the average loss in this study as $1,100. How widespread is this problem? Well, in 2016, for one game alone, CS GO, or Counter-Strike Global Offensive, conventional esports betting totaled 649 million in cash. But the skins betting market that year totaled $4.6 billion. Since then, the market did crash for a while, but recovered and is now, as of 2025 in November, back up to about $5 billion. And again, right, that's just the value of the skins betting market for one single game, Counter-Strike 2 in this case, which is the sequel. And again, furthermore, skins betting is largely legally unregulated, which again makes it more accessible to youth. Now, how exactly does this digital accessibility work? Children and teens have loved circumventing restrictions across all eras of history. And these days, when some of them may be more technologically advanced than parents, it may be even more difficult to restrict access without knowing what you're doing. So youth may create an account using someone else's ID or a fake ID. They may use a virtual private network or VPN to create an encrypted connection, hiding their actual location and allowing them to pretend they're in another country with lower or no age restrictions. Also, some websites, again, as Kim mentioned, are less stringent in the first place, such as offshore crypto casinos, where you're betting using cryptocurrency. And similarly, in terms of skins betting specifically, most sites actually allow you to deposit the skins without personal verification, but then they require it to withdraw the money you may have earned. So many youth involved in online gambling will not talk about it openly, as with many addictions. So, in light of that secrecy, here are some warning signs you can look out for to best protect the youth you know and love. Preoccupation with a new sport or video game is concerning sometimes, even if they don't explicitly mention gambling or betting. They may be frequently checking statistics or experiencing overly intense emotions over specific outcomes. Strange amounts of money coming in or out, especially when accompanied by no explanation, right, or lying about it. A decrease in self-care, as with any other addiction, participating in the addictive behavior becomes more appealing than things like eating, showering, sleeping. Academic performance also becomes less important, so youth might start skipping homework and studying or even school entirely, which leads to poor grades and truancy. Withdrawing from activities and relationships, someone may go from participating in clubs and sports and social events to spending all their time by themselves on their computer, their phone, in their bedroom. Mental health issues such as anxiety and depression, including low self-esteem and, as we discussed earlier, thoughts of suicide or suicidal behaviors. Criminal behavior, often to obtain more money to gamble with. And use for abusive substances like drugs and alcohol, whether that is because these addictive pathways have already formed in the brain, but it also could be to cope with the negative emotions and stress associated with problematic gambling. So clearly the short and long-term consequences of gambling, especially as a youth, are severe. How do we prevent it? Historically, most efforts have been targeted to adults via things like public education campaigns, psychological treatment, family and peer-based support, legal regulations like restrictive features on machines and constraints on advertising. Youth gambling, especially online gambling, is somewhat of a newer phenomenon, so there is a lot of research still being conducted, but the main goals are clear. We want to reduce actual gambling behavior, meaning the time and money spent gambling online, and also to correct misperceptions and increase knowledge related to gambling on individual and societal levels. Of course, these goals must be tailored to various identity factors like age. Talking about this with a fourth grader is going to look very different than talking to a senior in high school, for example. But some things are potentially going to be helpful regardless of age, gender, culture, and things like that. So I'd like to end today by providing you with some practical relationship-centered strategies for having these difficult conversations with youth, honestly, whether they are already engaged in problematic gambling or not yet. First, make sure the conversation happens at a relevant, appropriate, and private time. For instance, you do not want to call someone out in front of their friends. You want to take a curious, not judgmental approach. So start by asking questions instead of jumping into assumptions and assertions. General questions are best. So do you know anyone who, dot, 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 instead of directly accusing the youth, even if you already know for sure that maybe they're participating in this behavior. By asking, you're giving them the opportunity to be heard and understood, which is a powerful crisis de-escalation technique and minimizes the chances, therefore, that they might become defensive and shut down and automatically reject your concerns. Remember, they need help, not punishment. They are not bad. Their actions are problematic in a way that's separate to them as a person. You want to explain the potential risks and or the actual harms that they may have encountered, but you want to do this while expressing hope. There needs to be a balance between the seriousness of the consequences and the enduring possibility for recovery, because otherwise, if you frame it as all hope is lost, they could take drastic action up to and including hurting themselves or others. So we want to be collaborative, say something like, we can get through this together, I'm on your side. And based on the scientific literature I encountered, active engagement is best. So this should be an interactive conversation, not a lecture. You don't need to also have all the answers already. In fact, researching the topic together can be an effective and engaging tool in itself. Now, what should this conversation include specifically? Well, first of all, it should not be a one-off conversation, right? If problematic gambling already exists, it definitely is going to require frequent check-ins. But even if it doesn't, it should be an ongoing discussion at different life stages to ideally prevent the behavior from beginning and to catch it early if it does. So what goals should you focus on as part of this discussion? I did mention intellectual development earlier, that comes up here too. Teaching and strengthening simple math skills, such as those related to probability and statistics, that's helpful from an academic standpoint. I also earlier mentioned media literacy. So, youth are not born knowing how to properly evaluate media, especially in these days. It does need to be taught. In schools, we often see this done in English class by analyzing literature, but you can do it at home as well. And you can connect it directly to more digital forms of media by things like critiquing the goals of advertisements you see, practicing researching things you don't know using reputable resources, discussing how to be a responsible social media citizen, and modeling critical thinking skills in general. Ideally, youth grow to understand that marketing, whether it's from a traditional sort of advertisement or these days more likely via some sort of influencer, we want them to understand that marketing is all about telling persuasive stories, and some of these stories are more accurate than others. We didn't discuss financial literacy yet, but this is another important goal. And what this looks like is going to depend heavily on the child's age. But when it's developmentally appropriate, we want to introduce youth to things like household expenses, budgeting, short and long-term savings, financial needs versus wants. This makes money and the consequences of money seem a lot more legitimate in a virtual world where tangible cash is rare and digital forms of money often feel less quote unquote real. And finally, resisting peer pressure should be an ongoing directive, especially for children and teens. Youth want to fit in potentially at any cost. So helping them turn uncomfortable things down by learning to say no, is a full sentence, right? Creating distractions, making excuses, avoiding certain people and situations, or even blaming you as a parent. Sorry, my mom is so annoying. She doesn't let me use that app. That's far better than letting your child use an app that then goes on to harm them in some way. So overall, we're looking at building, maintaining, and maintaining self-control by enhancing skills in decision making, problem solving, and goal setting. And here are some more practical strategies for supporting youth, especially if they are potentially already engaging in some sort of gambling. First, setting healthy boundaries around finances. Ideally, youth won't have access to things like your debit or credit card, whether that involves sleeping with your wallet or not. But just in case, you want to set up transaction alerts and you want to make time to review bank and card statements, preferably very frequently, like on a daily basis, at least at first. There's also modern digital technology, which we can take advantage of, aimed specifically at reducing gambling behavior. There's apps and other software designed for this purpose. So there's something called Gamban, for example, which blocks tens of thousands of gambling sites and apps worldwide. One literature review I encountered identified that specifically for youth, when participation in digital technology is a part of treatment, this actually can lead to more positive behavioral changes, probably due to a combination of increased convenience, familiarity with, and enjoyment of technology. Seeking professional help if necessary, especially early on. Specialized therapy is available for problematic youth gambling in various formats, such as individual, family, and group formats. One common therapeutic approach involves something you may have heard of called cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT, where youth will learn behavioral techniques like how to deal with triggers and urges, cognitive tools like how to recognize cognitive distortions, such as the one we talked about earlier, the gambler's fallacy, and finally, emotional regulation skills like how to handle stress in a healthier, more productive manner. How do you find this type of professional help? Well, one way, there is a hotline, a 24/7 hotline, 1-800-MY-RESET, which is the number for the National Problem Gambling Hotline. So this is a neutral resource, and you can access it at any point in someone's relationship to gambling. It does not have to be a dire situation yet in order to reach out. The hotline is free. You can do phone calls, texts. There's also a website named 1-800-MyReset.org, where you can do online chat sessions. Basically, whatever the format, you will get in touch with trained professionals who can connect you to local resources and referrals. Now, at the end of the day, while problematic gambling in youth, online especially, is a very serious and increasingly widespread issue, it is also possible to prevent and treat. There's a saying that goes, you can't change yesterday, you can't predict the future, but you can control today. So now Kim is going to return to review the Parents Standing Together organization as another potential resource for you for awareness and support. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Genevieve. That was super helpful. I loved how a lot of the things you said, I was like, oh yeah, that happened to me. Oh, that happened to me. So that's great. So our organization is called Parents Standing Together. So few of us who have children that have kind of fallen down this path got together around a year ago and kind of started meeting and then realized that there's a lot more need for this support out there that just wasn't there. So we are creating it kind of as we go because it's still pretty new. We have a website, like I said, parentsstandingtogether.org. There's lots of information on there for not just parents whose children are currently suffering gambling harm, but a bunch of the things that Genevieve talked about in a little bit more detail, the different ways that kids are gambling. Also, kids are still using bookies, which I didn't know because my kid didn't use one, but we have some horror stories of parents interacting with bookies. So that's definitely something to watch out for. Sweepstakes sites like Fliff, sites that aren't technically gambling but are gambling is problematic. And the thing that's really kind of busting onto the place now is the financial stuff, the prediction markets. I think Genevieve mentioned some of those, like bet on the weather and day trading. A lot of kids that we see coming into the group, I mean, their parents are coming into the group, are going down because of these financial things, which is especially risky because parents look at those and think like, oh, great, my kid's gonna, work in the stock market and be rich. This is awesome. And maybe not. It might be really super dangerous depending on how they're using it. And then crypto, Genevieve also mentioned like the crypto sites. It's very, very easy for kids to hide money from us now. There's a million ways that they can hide money. And the access is intense. I'm glad that she mentioned Gamban. We use that in our family. And I think people should put that on their kids' devices like preemptively, right? It blocks all of the sites, all of the illegal sites, and it just, again, they might be able to get around it, but it's just another layer of friction. So strongly recommend Gamban. It's like $40 a year. It's not super expensive. And then, okay, so for Parents Standing Together, so what we do is we're trying, of course, raise awareness because we would rather not have support groups full of parents that are suffering when their children are suffering. We're happy to help them, but we'd rather kids not get on the path in the first place, right? So we really want you guys, parents, clinicians, if you're starting to see kids, doctors, anyone that works with youth, I don't know exactly who's on this call, but anyone who is interacting with kids needs to know these warning signs and see them and be able to recognize, especially financial transactions that seem strange, lack of money that seems strange, intense knowledge of speaking about it. My son, when he came home from college before that big, incident collapse, he was super into the NBA and he knew every stat and came home just full of knowledge. And we were like, wow, this is great. Let's go see the Warriors. We went to a game. Like, no, gambling addict, didn't see it, right? So clear as the day, but didn't see it. Um, we're trying to do speaking engagements like this, just trying to get the word out. And we have some social media pages that we're trying to get going just to get the information to people. If you find yourself in a position where you want to learn more, check out the website. If you are in a situation where you're like, oh gosh, wait, I think you're talking about my kid, then immediately do not pass go, do not collect $200. Call us, get in touch with us, and start to get help because gambling disorder is a progressive illness and it will get worse, right? Once it kind of starts, that line is crossed in the brain and those, starts firing the way it's firing, it is nothing but downhill until help is found. Okay. So please hear me say that if you have like a high school kid who kind of got in a little bit of trouble with betting and you had to give him like, $100 or whatever, he got into trouble or with a bookie or just starting down the path at all, begging you please to get educated and stop it now because I will not even bore you with the stories. Mine is maybe shocking to you. I am one of, I can't tell you how many. We are not unique. My family story is not unique. It is happening all over the place, and some are much worse than mine. We luckily kind of got it together when our son was in his early 20s. We have parents in our group, their kids are 40 and they're still dealing with this because it has not been dealt with. It is not going to get better. We have a website, we have support groups. You can find our online community. We have one on Facebook and on a website called Evive. And we're going to start a course soon for learning about it if you kind of feel like you're starting down that path. But the number one thing to do is everything's on the website. Our email is on there too. It's hello@parentstandingtogether.org. Yep, thank you. There's our link tree. It takes a minute to load for some reason, but it has all our socials and everything. If you are in a place where you need us to come talk to you, you need I don't know, resources, I don't know how to fund things like nonprofits or want to make a donation, we'll take that too. We're trying to get moving and everything is there. And please reach out to me if you have any questions, email, whatever. More than happy to speak to anybody about anything involving youth gambling. And I really appreciate the opportunity to share my story. Hopefully it's going to help somebody and what our group is doing because I think it's really important and it's definitely needed. It's coming. It's coming for our kids, y'all. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Genevieve. You have opened our eyes. I have to say, you've given us a lot to think about, and it just feels like we're just at the beginning of this. Kim, we appreciate you channeling your experience into something so positive to help other parents. I think you're going to be very busy as this issue just keeps evolving and exploding, and as we as adults try to stay ahead of it to keep our local youth safe. So thank you both. So we're just about at our time here. I just want to say if anybody here would like to stay informed about other issues, if you have ideas for upcoming events, please stay in touch with us. And I just encourage you to do two things. One, we've got our link tree also here with the QR code. Sign up for our newsletter. That's how it's a very old school way, but that's how we get our invitations out there and information. And please do so. Another option is to sign up for our open door information session with Second Story. There you can hear more about our other programs, other issues we're seeing, and just learn more. They're very low pressure opportunities to learn more about the challenges local youth are facing and how we're working to help. So as I mentioned, we're going to share today's recording across other channels. Please share it with other people that you know so that we can get the word out and keep this conversation going so that people have the tools and just can keep looking over their children's shoulders and make sure that what they're doing is in fact something that's safe. So we will send a follow-up email with contact information if anyone has additional questions or any kind of suggestions for future learning series events. And just thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate it. And I hope everyone has a wonderful Memorial Day. Thank you again, Kim. Thank you, Genevieve.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.